a.m. United States East Coast. The Lord's blessing be upon you, and welcome to Sunrise in Pineland. I'm your host, Tom Kaczynski. Up here in the northern flank, it's 30 below this morning, and this house isn't that good at keeping out the warmth, or excuse me, keeping out the cold. So it's definitely a cold morning, but that's okay. We'll survive it, and we'll stay frosty, my friends, as the beer commercial says. So, I want to thank everyone who's here for the program today. We're going to look at some different things happening in the world, the response to the Russia thing, the proposal was sent over by NATO. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at what's happening up there in Canada. That's worth a long conversation, and get in some other topics. Just a reminder, if you want to support the program, the Venmo CVC PRV, PO Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442. I do this for a living. Basically, I look at the news and I write books sometimes. Go look at the books on Amazon. I don't mention those enough. And if you want to support the program, join the community on Telegram. We're trying to do something real here in Pineland, and it's one of those interesting things. Let's jump into this. Let's look. The Canadian convoy continues trucking. I was watching just a few minutes ago videos of trucks loading off the ferry that comes from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia. It's like a giant cruise ship. It unloads at Sydney, Nova Scotia. I've actually been there before. A lovely little community. And what we see are people coming from all around that nation, and you see the people in the countryside coming out, and they're waving their Canadian flags, and they're cheering, and you hear the inspirational story from the kids, and you hear the people sitting there in their cities saying, and Trudeau saying, well, a small minority doesn't have anything to say. I thought you were the people, you tolerant folks, who cared about the plight of minorities, of people who were persecuted because they didn't think the same, or because they didn't look the same, or because they didn't act the same. Maybe because they're country folks. Maybe because instead of being clean shaven, they have a beard, and instead of running around in $600 suits, they're wearing beat up old overalls because, oh yeah, you went ahead and you brought a whole bunch of people in so that they wouldn't be able to afford even the land they lived on, and so they've had to live poor and close to the earth. But you want to tax them off that too, because you want them to live how you want to live. And that's the story at the beginning of this episode, which is that we live in a world where we have choices about everything else. Why don't we have choices about the government we have? Why is it that we're born into a certain place and we're saddled with a terrible leadership above us? Why is it that we've accepted this model? Pineland rejects this model. We say that there's a whole lot of land. There's people who want to use certain areas. Like, obviously, the people who believe in the global agenda, who said, hey, we just need to keep getting shot until they get the technology right. You want to live in a city? You want to live in a pod? You want to live in an 8x8 cubicle for the rest of your life and have Oculus glasses on? Go for it. I don't begrudge you your loss. I think it's sad. I think it's a loss of your own talent and potential. I'm sure the Lord is sad about it, but ultimately, free will allows these options for people. What we hope for, and what has the cock crowing this morning, as they say, is that we want to have a place where we can live how we want to live also. We don't need a lot of land. We just need land that's our own and to be left alone. And what I think will happen, and look, we would love to see something good happen. I know that the people in Canada have been oppressed like crazy for years, and I mention them a lot because I talk to them a lot, because what happens there tends to come here, same as we see throughout the Anglosphere. It comes to America last because Americans are the most difficult people. At least in that conjunction, although I will certainly not take any away from my Anglo brethren in terms of how many of them behave. And I understand that too. That's fine. But what I'm saying is that they are trying to reclaim their country. But let's say they go to Ottawa, they have a big, example. The government says it's going to make concessions. They go home with victory, and then a week later they forget. Because it's very easy for politicians to forget, and it's very hard for people to organize. My suggestion is the battle is not lost at that point. Rather, the ultimatum has been made, and that the moral statement has been made, where these are people now ranging from the prairies all the way from over there in Vancouver and in the Yukon, who are coming out and who are helping from Newfoundland and the North Shores of Quebec. All of those people are people who deserve a country where they will be welcome. And the same for our American friends, for the people in Australia who've been under insane oppression, New Zealand, who's been in the other hand another lockdown, and for England, who, except for the fact that Boris Johnson likes to get knackered, wouldn't even have liberty at all. And this is just not acceptable to us. And why should we have to fight a war? I mean, and maybe it's just the nature of history, that we would have to fight a war to be free, but how can we be presented as the bad guys in this story? And what we should do is we should articulate, to make very clear, is we don't want to take back these countries. We don't want to play your games anymore. We want to have a country of our own, and we want to have places, and it doesn't have to be one place. It can be more than one. It's fine. We have plenty of space to divide the map to live how we used to live. In America, that worked. It was called federalism. And the same happened in Canada, devolution. That's why Scotland and Wales have a parliament, these are things that could be done very easily, and yet they don't happen. And why? Because of the corrupting influence of money. But the good news for us all is the dollar is breaking. We are watching it day by day, and we'll go into the next part of the story from this. So what happened was NATO sent their response over to the Russians. The U.S. did, and basically they reiterated what you would expect them to say, which is they have no desire whatsoever to negotiate with Russia. And that's fine. Look, they have the position that they can expand to whomever they want, and they don't want to live in a sphere of influence, multipolar world. They want to believe in one world order, and it runs through the West, and the United States runs it. Not surprisingly, every other country who isn't either a beneficiary of that order or dependent on it is saying we don't want to be a part of it. And as we do these actions against Russia, you know what we are doing. America is pushing Russia and China together. They're pushing Russia and Iran together, Iran and China. And you think the Indians are looking at this too and thinking, do I want to get into this thing? So Russia is going to look at this. And I've already watched Lavrov talk about this, that he considers the response that was sent by the Americans as dealing with only secondary issues of which they feel comfortable. And Russia is going to deal with Ukraine how they deal with Ukraine. Even today in Russia, what are they celebrating? They're celebrating the siege of Leningrad, which was a ugly, awful affair. And I was watching this video where Lake Ladoga, which is northeast of the city of Leningrad, was basically a lake that froze over in winter. And what they did was they had trucks that were running across that lake to bring food into the starving people, or while the German blockade was happening. And I think it was 41, if I remember right, 42. I have to check the exact year. Anyway, so they were running that in, and I was reading that 1 out of 4 people who did this died. So Russia is no stranger to loss, to suffering, to privation. I mean, look, they live in weather that makes this, what I'm dealing with, warm, and these are the people you want to fight with, and we say, oh, well, it's always the weather. What kind of people are able to live in weather like that? And look, I can do it. I'm Slavic. I'm part Russian. It's not so hard for me, but is this really the battle we want to be picking and go into their near periphery? Is it bad for the Ukrainians? Maybe, yeah. Maybe it is, and maybe that's the path to peace. Ukraine is going to be screwed in this equation either way. It sucks for the Ukrainians. But if it can lead to peace to everyone else and less death in Ukraine, this is what happens. And this is where you have, a multipolar world. And you have to deal with those realities. And I know it seems contradictory when I'm saying everyone should be able to live however they want to live, all right? But that's a Western model of the world, and we live in the West, and we have to think differently. In the Eastern model of the world, they have things different. And with respect to Russia, there were so many lies told. And I don't know. I mean, it gets complicated, right? Because, I talk to people who support the Ukrainians and who say, hey, they just want to be free, and they want to live how they want to live, and I get that. And they were living how they wanted to live, and they did have the guy in there who they voted for. They had Yanukovych, and then, you know what happened? The CIA came in there and they displaced him. And they do this over and over again, and it makes me realize that at least, I think the thing people like about Putin is that at least it's an old school sort of imperialist model, where at least it's personalized. Here, we always pretend we do evil things. Oh, I don't know who did it. Everyone's looking the other way. Washington is so wicked, and I don't, you get to a point where it's difficult to even talk about it anymore. But what I will say is, without getting too much into the sides of it, is that Russia is going to continue moving forward. They're going to seek a solution in Ukraine independent of whatever NATO does. And we're going to see what that means. And Russia's been playing with kid gloves. What would happen if the Russians, and you know what, if Russia was as cruel as they painted Putin as being, they would just shut off all oil right now between Russia and Belarus and let Europe freeze to death. And you know what? Maybe that would break NATO. Or maybe they're thinking, hey, we don't want to stiffen their resolve. And the meeting that happened in Normandy there was a big meeting between Macron, I guess Schultz, what's his name? The Russians sent their guy there, and then whoever the Ukrainians sent. Which was the Normandy meeting, and they're trying, for a moment, there is a ceasefire that's holding, according to the Minsk agreements, between the Donetsk and Luhansk republics and what's happening with the rest of Ukraine. And that's good news. It's a start. But it's probably not an end, because this isn't at Ukraine at this point. This is about the question if we're going to live in a unipolar world or a multipolar world. And, if you're an American and you want to look at the history of America, America's original doctrine was Washington said, do not seek foreign interventions. The Monroe Doctrine that, the British helped us enforce was do not leave the North American continent. And what have we done? We have done the exact opposite of that, pretty much since Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, since we got ginned into the Spanish-American War, which made Cuba a lot better. If Cuba was still part of Spain, we'd probably wouldn't have the problem of having missiles shot at us, just from there. And Russia's talking to Cuba, to Nicaragua, to Venezuela, saying they want to put hypersonic missiles in there. And by what logic can we say no? Oh, you can't do that in our backyard. Well, we said the opposite to the Russians. And if we had spheres of influence, that would be good, because good fences make good neighbors, and the understanding that different rules apply in different places is smart. That works in the micro sense within a country, within a community, and it works in the macro sense with the world and the different borders that are out there. It doesn't mean that sometimes people end up at the wrong place. Yeah, it does. And that's the legitimate purpose of migration, to get people of similar mindsets together and to put natural boundaries between them so that we don't have to fight one another. The one-size-fits-all approach is terrible. Look, I actually like multiculturalism in this one aspect. I like individual countries to have distinct individual cultures that are respected when you are there, and that do not try to make every culture like every other culture. When I go to China, I don't want to feel like I'm in London. When I go to Japan, I don't want to feel like I'm in Paris. And yet, if you go to, the center of these cities in a lot of ways, beyond the monuments and the aesthetics of it, you see the same corporations, the same arrangements, and even the way people describe it. I listen to a lot of alternative media. You guys know that. And they talk about, well, I don't know why Russia would do this. There's not money in it. Not every civilization is obsessed with money. The Russians spent 30 years with a ruble, couldn't even buy a pint of vodka. And you think they're worried about money? This is about respect. This is about dignity. This is about space. And I know the West doesn't understand that, because we worship money. And when money goes away, we're not going to know what to worship, and we're going to go crazy. And that's the problem with inflation. That's why our leaders actually look at these wars and think it's so necessary to get us into them, because they're worried about that. And that's why they're rushing. I think that's at least part of why they're rushing away these mandates. Because if they're removing the mandates, here's my thought. And now they've gotten so many people jabbed. What's happening is whatever the long-term consequence of it can be hidden more easily when people are out versus people being home. And yeah, they want the control mechanism, but they're losing control, and they're seeing that internationally there's too many problems. So that might be why OSHA lifted the mandate on those 100 workers. And what was it? It was something where a whole bunch of people sold out because they didn't have the ability to resist the pressure. And I had a good friend of the program reach out to me, and he shared a story, and I'm going to share it with you because it's a legitimate story. In his experience, and this is an honest gentleman, I take it as word, the people who did not get jabbed got very sick, and some died. And the people who did get jabbed didn't have those experiences. And it's directly contrary to my own experience and the experience of most people I talk to, but it's a reminder that biology is weird, and that viruses affect different people different ways, and that there are people and there are casualties. And it's a reminder, I guess, that we have to remember, and this is the hard part, and this is the part for Pineland that's difficult too, is all of us who are kind of the heavy pushers in this are hardcore against this. I mean, to the point of it being a salvation issue for some of us, okay? But yet there are people who are just trying to go forward, and the frustration many of us have with them, in the sense that they're enablers, they're collaborators, is palpable. And I'm not going to talk away from that. My job is not to throw the people, who I agree with under the bus, and yet there are these other stories, and we have to be able to talk to each other and interface and share real information and hold people to account, and always respect the right of people to have health sovereignty decisions where they choose to have this or not have this. I do understand there are risks that I incur by not doing certain things. I am more happy to accept those risks versus being used as a pincushion for genetic experimentation. And that's how I feel about it. And this is something that we need to talk about more aggressively, because Fauci's out there saying that they want to go and prescribe children under the age of 4 to 3 jabs at the time when they're most delicate in their development. And all of you have seen many, many videos of people having strange impacts, neurological disorders, not to mention the long-term consequences and risks of something where it wasn't studied properly. Many of you will have seen the DoD study that just came out, where they were looking at the number of people who were having problems, where you see neurological disorders up, a ridiculous amount, 10 times the amount of people who were suffering from this. Other people have been doing a better job covering it. Hagman did a good job on it. Adams did a good job. The True News boys have done a good job. And I don't want to get into it overly deeply, but suffice it to say that the long-term consequences of this jab are likely to be dangerous and are still unknown. And yet they are pushing forward in all these governments to move this forward, except for the fact now they want us as meat for the grinder for the war they want, because they have to restart the economy. They have to get things going again. And It's not going to. You broke the world. Now we need a new world. The new world order's coming, but it ain't going to be what you thought it was. It's going to be a bunch of us doing things differently than you had hoped, and a bunch of us saying we are not going to be participants in it, and we are going to devote ourselves, and we're going to reset the civilization. Fine, let's have the great reset. Let's put what's at the center of it. You say you want nature and society, okay, that's fine. It's funny you say that because you don't want anyone in nature. Those of us who actually live in nature, who understand that, me, who literally lives with chickens in the background of this thing, I know more about nature than you do. Your idea of nature is getting roses on top of your fancy penthouse cafe. All right. What you actually learn is that man lives in harmony with nature when he actually works in it, and when he lives simpler and he lives honest and humble and close to the land, and that's what resonates, and where you can find your spirit enlivened and your soul uplifted. Because instead of chasing technology, the new thing, the fastest thing, and the wars that inevitably leads to because of who's going to possess what, you can live a humbler, simpler life, and you can live an honest life with simpler pleasures. And yes, you don't have as much, but what you have, you value. And that's really the question. Are we trying to change the world, or are we trying to change ourselves? I said, and in God we must, there is no political solution to a spiritual problem. And our civilization is the cause of our spiritual problem. We need to get to a place and a mindset that's different. And that's why we don't need a lot of land. We just need some good land. And that's what Pineland is all about. This idea that, here in the far northeast of the North American continent, in the Maritimes and in northern New England, we want to spawn something different. But Pineland is not something, is an idea that is not inapplicable to other places. Maybe in eastern or in southern Appalachia, it's a good fit. In the Rocky Mountains, and the names will change. It doesn't matter. It's a placeholder for what would represent more organically the interests of their people. Though there's a lot of white pines up where I live, and Lord knows I've made a flag or two over the years about those sorts of things. But that is where we need to walk to. And I think that one of the things we do is I hope, for the sake of the people involved, that they succeed in all these movements. But look at what happened on January 6th, and I wonder what's going to happen on Saturday in Ottawa. I hope something really good happens. I expect something bad might happen. And the thing is, then people give up, they they go home, and they let go of the ideas. And it's because they think they're going to fix a system that hates them. The system has always existed to work against them, not for them. It's especially true, I'd argue, in Canada, and the way British control was exerted in certain ways, even more so than the United States system. And I know a little bit of the history of that country. I'm not an expert on it, but I know more than your average American. That being said, we need to, when they say no, we say, okay, we're going to go, and we shut it down. And this is the fight. The fight is very simple. The one tool we have is they need us to keep the scam going. All of us have to pool our efforts wherever and however we can to make sure that we support one another, and we do not further enable a system that hates us, is going to attack us. And that's something that's going to be an ongoing struggle. And the problem is, if you don't do that, they're going to punish you over and over again, to the point where we will not have the possibility of offering resistance. The hour is very late, okay? And, we could go to a fight over it. I mean, but that's just going to destroy everything. And that's kind of what they want. They want the controlled demolition so they can recognize their new world order, where European bankers use Chinese labor and Russian guns to keep the world afloat. And that the vision of the hope, I mean, really, if you look at North American civilization, I have European friends, so I talk to them. What differentiates North America from Europe is that we still have faith. Not all of us. A lot of people have faith in science, which is insane, which is literally idol worship. But for those who still have faith here, who, because maybe we haven't been through those terrible wars, or because we aren't so smart that we've become so cynical, we still have hope we can do something else. And without faith, you do not have civilization, because you lose imagination. You lose the belief that there's a better day tomorrow. And we struggle with that. And this channel, Lord knows we struggle. You know my despair. You've seen the days, and Dana can tell you, it's awful. Where we look at this and we stare into the abyss. We're sitting here at the edge of potentially nuclear war. Thankfully, Putin said Russia's not going to contemplate a nuclear first strike. But I tell you what, if they go into Ukraine, as I suspect they will, and you see, NATO begin arming other people, they may very well strike backwards toward this, and then at some point say, you know what, this is going to happen. Or maybe when all our troops start going over there, maybe the Chinese do something and make it look like the Russians. There's a lot of moving pieces in this, because we are now all fighting over the same toy. And you know what I'm doing? I want to put the toy down. I want to go outside. I want to enjoy the sun that the Lord gave us to be under. And I want to enjoy my brothers and sisters who want to walk away with me. And that's how I look at it. And I have faith that if we don't fight over this toy, there'll be a new toy that will be better. And you know what? Maybe instead of being a computer, it'll be a Lego set. And we can sit together and build some things with bricks and do things the way we used to do it. Wouldn't that be great if not every contact between people was mediated by technology? Good morning, Tim. And good morning to everyone who's here this morning as we talk about, what Pineland can actually do and how we need to begin withdrawing because, people are caught up in all sorts of things. I saw Stephen Breyer is going to be resigning because they want to replace him with a leftist. Okay, that's fine. Rumor floating around. I don't believe it, but it's an interesting one that they want to appoint Kamala Harris and make Hillary your vice president. You want to have a civil war in America? Put that woman in the White House. But hey, maybe they will. Maybe that's what they want. After all, it's her turn. But whether they do that or don't do that, I know the bloodbath is coming in the 2022 midterms, but it won't matter because the Republicans don't change anything. The bloodbath happened after the Tea Party. They didn't change anything. 1994, they didn't change anything. And why would they? The same people are writing the paychecks. So instead of watching the 49ers win, we see the Cowboys win. How exciting. Instead of doing that, why don't we look to say we want to do things differently and take power away from DC? Because that is the military-industrial complex. That is the banking system. And they are destroying cryptocurrency. You can see it bit by bit, and so they can have control through the CDBCs. So that effort is failing. The idea of the internet would, allow us to do something. All it allows is them to monitor every connection between us. We would be much better sitting in back rooms talking to one another. And if we didn't have the internet, we probably would be doing that, and we probably would have done something by now, and they couldn't have stopped us. And you see what I'm saying? That when you play with their tools and their toys, you are stuck in their system. And so we need to figure out ways to begin getting out of that. But unfortunately, and it's irony that is not lost on me, this is where we are. This is where the conversation is for the moment. And yet, if there is a moment of mass unrest, or if there is a reset that happens because our technology and toys are taken away from us, because the bully that is Washington, all the other little bullies come up, and whether they be Russia, China, maybe some of the EU who are just mad at having a friend who was mean to them, then maybe we will be free, and maybe that's what's required. It's often the case that a greater evil has to have lesser evils remove it so that good men can flourish, and that is where we are in the story right now. So let's take a look what you guys are writing today. Thank you for everyone who's here this morning. Good morning to you all, including whoever I missed. Skeptical, good to see you. Hope all is well. Raven, good to see you. Dipper, glad you are here. Raven, let's see. People who vote will choose lesser of two evils and are willing to accept it. Broadcast technology has filled Western countries with majority of their brainwashed zombie TV addicts. I agree with that, but I'd go even further and say that social media has caused us to get directly linked up to a dopamine drip to the point where we can't think. Do you know how hard it is to do long-term thinking? I'll give you a test. You want to have a Pineland exam? Go read a book. Read a book of more than 50 pages. See if you can do it. I'll bet you any money you will struggle like crazy. And it doesn't even have to be a book. Pick your favorite book. Pick a fiction book you loved. Like several months ago, I picked up Lord of the Rings to read it, and I struggled. I struggled to get into it. Now, once I got into it, I was good, but my brain didn't want to go into this mode. It was like I felt this constant anxiety. I'm like, what's happening? What am I missing? And that unease is a big part of the how should I put it, the inertia that keeps us still because we're afraid we're missing something. And of course you are, but it's that uncertainty that becomes a part of your being because your habits shape your very personality in ways you don't understand because you don't understand how technology is working on you. And, some say, oh, that's what's happening with 5G. That's what's happening with other things. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I sort of believe these things happen. But even the technologies we have in front of us, in the way in which we process data, image, video, all of these things, they work in a way where our minds no longer work the way they do. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm studying for my ham radio test. I worked through Section 9, and I was working on antenna. And by the way, it's pretty cool to think of antennas as little loops, like little balls of bubbles waiting to receive signals, and they go wah, 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 wah. It's like, because I try to understand, and I close my eyes, and I make metaphors, and I try to visualize what it is this thing is actually doing. So I'm like, oh, it's a cloverleaf bubble on a direct, it's called a multi-directional antenna. Wah, 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 wah. And it's like, but I'm picturing all these things are happening in the world, and the world's an amazing place, but we limit ourselves to one thing. We take a world where the whole spectrum's like this, and we go down to this, and then this, and this, and then we end up with such narrow vision where we're led along a track. Good morning. Dana's here. Anne of Green Gables. I have actually been to PEI. I've been to the Anne of Green Gables house. It is awesome. It's actually really beautiful. If you want ever a tranquil place to go, if they ever open up the damn border again, I swear, I'm on here. You guys have me here. You will see a show with Dana and I on sitting on Adirondack chairs in that beach. And if we can smuggle one in, we'll smuggle a chicken with us because I'm sure Anne would approve of the hijinks of that. Shout out to Lucy Maud Montgomery. Actually, the funny thing about that series is it's fun to see the Victorian culture they tried to keep in Canada. It's something that I really admire, and I actually like that they have tea as opposed to coffee. Okay, let's see. Dipper writes, Canada convoy has given many countries some inspiration and hope. I hope the truckers can succeed in convincing the government to scrap these mandates. And I hope, by the way, their demands, just so you understand, I've said this before, but from what I hear, they have two demands: either drop the mandate or have the government resign. And we'll see. And, it's a little trickier than that because in Canada, it's a little complicated. If there's any Canadians here, please correct me. Doesn't the Governor General of Canada have the ability? Because technically, the head of state of Canada is the Queen. Or it's a little tricky, but the Governor General approves the Prime Minister who serves at the behest of the Queen. And if the Governor General asked the Prime Minister to resign in Canada, would he be obliged to do so, and would that be a big issue? Now, I know these seem like old imperial handovers, but those monarchy countries often there's these weird little powers that monarchs can use that they don't because they don't think of it that way. But if they really wanted to, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't. And the one thing monarchs always want is to be popular. And as we're heading toward the age of new authoritarianism, who knows? Maybe you could see something like that. Lord knows, if I was the monarch, I would tell the Parliament to go stuff itself, which is why every now and then people told old Lord Tom need to be in charge of something. I'm good at that, but I'm not good at running my day-to-day life. I had the hot water went out again this morning. The pipe froze, but I got it working. So I had it open a little bit, but not enough. Let's see. They Live is a documentary. It's 1980s movies where the sunglasses gave a different view of things. Self-proclaimed elites use broadcast technology to keep populace asleep and to obey, consume, stay asleep, buy, conform, reproduce. Absolutely, they want us to do that. Swim Upstream writes, repent, Jesus is coming. Amen, brother. I feel that. Today is and by the way, if you haven't done it, please, please, please make it right with the Lord Jesus. I want to stop for 1 second because we're talking about North America and Europe. The Europeans are always looking for solutions of technology and society, and they look for clever solutions. But at some point, you have to admit your limitations, and that's the humility that's lacking. That's where Jesus comes in here, where you say, Lord, help us, deliver us. We know we are wicked people, and we admit that. And that humility builds character. It shows the limitations what you do, and it allows you to relate to others because it allows you to admit you can be wrong. And look, I succumb to despair, and I spend whole days wallowing. Dana will profess, and I have to lift myself up, and the way I lift myself up is like, Lord, please find and give me some of your strength, because I know I don't have it, and I know we don't have it. And how many times can we bang our head into the walls doing this? But yet, if we came together and we had something bigger, and you see the inspiration of people who do this and who just will not take no, and if they mow them all down, let's say the worst of all scenarios happen, if they pull Tiananmen in Toronto, right? It won't be the loss is theirs. That will be finally what gets people to this. And our indifference, I mean, God, our indifference is so terrible, especially with the thing with the kids and the new mandates they want to put in. It's terrible. And yet people are going forward with it. They don't even know. They don't even know. The West needs huge distraction after causing inflation, stripping our rights away. Ukraine's the perfect distraction. Agree. Let's see, just skipping over a couple things here to save a little bit of time. The last American vagabond, Ron Christian, has constantly documented accurate data, industry papers on January, and all things on the Jan. And I understand that. Yeah, absolutely. That there is, if you look at the research out there, the DoD, a lot of their internal stuff is showing that a lot more people were getting hurt. And these are the people who are supposed to defend us, by the way. I mean, we are sitting ducks in many ways. And if we need to begin organizing ourselves to get out of this. And it starts with the spiritual thing. We talk here in Pineland. I like to make things simple so that people can understand, so that we can tell them others. I know you people are smart. You don't need me to repeat things, but you don't know how to talk to dumb people, because smart people don't talk to dumb people. And I'm not being mean, and by dumb, I mean indiscriminate and simple. You need to make things simple. Faith, you put God first. Folk, you have people who share the same beliefs. Family, you support one another like blood, and you take care of your own. You bring men and women back together. You recoalesce around a common idea. They say build back better. Okay, we seek what is better, and we know it ain't you. That's it. And all this other stuff. I mean, I don't know. the war is coming. The Russians are going to go to war with Ukraine, and we're going to see if they start pushing us in there. Are we going to slide in there slow? Will it be a situation like World War One, where country after country mobilized? World War One was not supposed to be World War One. It was supposed to be a little thing about the fringes of the Austrian Empire. Yet the Germans get drawn, and it's interesting too, because if you look at the history of it, the Holy Alliance, that those would be the countries brought to war: Austria, Germany, which came out of Prussia, and Russia. Those were the very ones who had actually opposed the radicals, and you kind of wonder what the anarchists and the provocations. Maybe Gavrilo Princip, being an anarchist himself, was the original color revolutionary. I mean, who's funding these people to go around and sit there in cafes in Sarajevo? It's the same crap we just saw in Kazakhstan, or we saw in the Maidan, or we saw in Tahrir Square. Pick your place, that all this goes forward. And I tell you what, anyone who, it's interesting, if you support doctrines of demons, anarchy, chaos, collectivism, communism, this idea of mass totalitarianism, there's always a state sponsor for you. But Lord knows, if you're a Christian and you go out there and you just say, hey, we want to live the life of Jesus, you're presented as a terrorist. I mean, I guess the world knows its own, and it kind of shows you the evil behind all things, because you can't actually speak with love and caring for your people, and the idea that you would live a life as the Lord intended. It's really interesting if you are able to take that step back from the world, and not be so calculating in the sense of the pragmatism of it, but say, from a spiritual perspective, look at which movements succeed. The last time we had something like that was the mass, really, you'd have to go back to one of the Crusades, maybe the first Crusade, because even the Bible, I was explaining to a friend of mine who lives overseas. I was talking about the difference of faith between Europe and North America, and I made the point that it's interesting, the institutional church, because he was saying that religion went afoul. But I was like, if you look at the institutional churches that came out of Europe overwhelmingly, at least until the Reformation, I know I'm going to make some people mad with this, but they looked at the Bible, which is a book of strange holy men who lived in the wilderness, who were apart, who were flawed, who as individuals changed the world, and they decided instead we're going to adopt the Pharisee model, and that's what they did. And we live in a world, whether it's Jesuits in Catholicism, or whether it's Masons in Protestantism, where this is the means of control and religion. And Christ never talks about religion. One of the interesting things is that I read in a book the other day, which it's just stuck with me for a long time, is Jesus never wrote a book. I mean, it's not like Christ couldn't write. Obviously, he was a very good orator. He would have understood all that, but he never wrote a book. And why? Because he didn't want to fix the laws that way. He wanted to demonstrate through example. And he chose his ministry in talking to people, not in hardened orders, where the apostles were chosen by the actions, the works. And it was an active ministry. It was a living ministry. It wasn't just a code of laws to sit there. Yeah, there were rules, of course, and he affirmed everything that came before. But the way he chose to live that is very different than the way we choose to live that. And we do that because we're afraid and we're scared and we want to be protected. I mean, the real world of politics is wild. It's people, fighting one another. The real world of religion, I don't like the word spirituality. People use spirituality, and that can mean anything. The real world of divinity and devotion, I like those words better, is about recognizing the work that Christ can do in your life, and the possibility that anything can happen when you give worship to the Lord, and the Lord uses you as his tool. And if you dedicate your work to the Lord, okay, and you really are doing it for his purposes, he'll help you out. And will you get the outcomes you want? Not necessarily, but you'll reach people. You'll do something that gives meaning to your life today, and you'll start storing a couple treasures in heaven. That's what you got to do, and that's the battle. Because this state doesn't have it. They're gonna. I looked at the list, or rather, Dana read me the list of some of these Supreme Court people, and it seems like their only qualifications are that they can fit on an affirmative action list. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but I mean, realistically, this whole idea of equity, as where we don't even consider the content of a character, the content of a person's mind, their thoughts. We're just like, no, we just want to stack this. That has to end, and that's fine if you want to do that. If you want to play, everyone kneecap one another, I have no problem with that, as long as I don't have to be a part of it. And so we're going to work here, and we're going to try to articulate ways out of this, and we'll try to build. We'll see what happens in Canada this weekend. We'll have to watch, and after that, maybe it'll go really well. Who knows? I mean, maybe if they see, maybe we need to move to Canada. I mean, Lord knows my wife always moves north and eastward. Maybe we'll live on Prince Edward Island. That wouldn't be so bad. She'd go insane. No, my wife has a couple rules. She's like, has to have lakes, has to have trees, has to have water. But it would still technically be within the borders of the places I've been interested in. And if I end up living on a fishing lodge, with salt cod in Newfoundland, don't be surprised one day. Could happen that way. Although I love Maine, and I've had a lot of good experiences here. Although I am sad, the number of people, I was out yesterday, and they were just all masked up. And the fear is palpable. And look, I'm afraid too. I get it. I'm not judging. There's a lot of things to be afraid of, but people are afraid of the wrong things, and they're listening to the wrong people. And the funny thing is, it doesn't matter how many facts you put out there. It's the consequences of being outside that mainstream. And so something has to happen to disrupt the comfortable continuity that is so destructive. And I think it will happen. I mean, they can't hold us together. We know the economic problems. We know that the stock market has been very volatile, going down. Crypto has been going down. The supply chain, and now with these trucker convoys, it's going to be even worse. International shipping could be shut off at any time. Energy supplies, instability, and the world is crumbling. And as it crumbles, people are fighting to grab more of what's available on one hand, and they're also fighting to ensure their position in the hierarchy, to take as much as they can and pretend and look the other way so they can enjoy the good times. But what I invite everyone to do is to imagine a good time on the other side of this. And look, it may very well be that we are living here in the end days. There's a ton of evidence for that. I'm not arguing against it. But we still have to live day to day and do the work until the Lord comes, whether it be today, our lifetime, a week from now, or, long after our babies are born. Because there's a lot of people who look that way. I'll preach on that on Sundays and, make the argument. I think it's more than 50-50. We're in those days. But whether we are or whether we aren't, our obligation doesn't change, which is to worship the Lord and look out for one another. And we can't look out for one another if we're constantly having to look out for these people on top of us. And so we have to continue to organize. And while we wait for the last kingdom, we build a couple that give homage to a king far greater than any of us can imagine. And I think that's where Pineland goes. And people say, well, why don't you make it secular? Because secularism doesn't work. Because it believes in nothing. It affirms nothing. And we need to come back to the idea that in faith we can do things. Because faith is transformative. It is a change of personality. It's a change of character. What's the word there? Which is metanoia. That you become a different person. You're born again. And you know what? We need to be born again. Because you know what? This world is dying. And the person who made sense in that world, it didn't make sense, anymore. And we need to find those pathways. So when I pull these things together, this is something a lot of shows won't do. They don't like to connect these dots. There's people who do it. Steve Quayle does it a little bit. Mike Adams is starting to do it a little bit. But people don't like to do it. They like to pretend I'm neutral and I'm impartial. I'm not neutral. I don't want to be neutral. I want to be on the winning side. I want to be, with Dr. Curtis Hudson, look it up. I'm on the winning side. I want to be on the side of what's right and what's good, where God is. And I want to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I want to be a steward of the world. These people talk about, we're responsible for keeping, care of the planet. No, we can't handle that. We're responsible for following God's laws and trusting that God will lead us. And as we do that, is stewardship part of it? Yeah, but the difference is, do you worship man or do you worship something greater than man? Because if all you can worship is yourself, you're going to end up falling. And that's what the West has done. And because of that, that's why our leaders are getting ourselves into wars. That's why we've chased money and idols and all these things that are leading us into disarray and to chaos, and why we don't value our family and why we don't value each other, because we've forgotten our first love, which is that our job is to love the Lord our Father, and to love one another as we love ourselves. And if you can love others as you love yourself, you'll find you're a kinder person, a gentler person, a happier person, and it will help you keep sanity. And that's something that's really huge. I mean, this is real life lessons. And I know a lot of us are sad and we're lonely and we're scared and we don't know how to do this. And we look at a world that's getting away from us, and we know it. We know that old world is dead. We don't know yet how it's going to come, and we can talk about the individual pieces. Good morning, Rumpelstiltskin. What the hell are you doing in here? Dana will laugh at that. This is a clip from Once Upon a Time. But what I wanted to say in the end is a lot of chaotic things are happening. War is coming. War happens when the state loses its monopoly on violence and when it loses the authority of its people. What starts in Ukraine or Taiwan or Israel and Iran, wherever it starts, is going to spread fast in a bunch of places, because the states of the world have been at war with their people for too long, and people are not going to do what they need to do to support the states. So the states will take the easy fodder who have supported them, and they're going to waste that. The rest of us have to pick how we're going to evade them, how we're going to build our own things, and how we're going to defend one another. And that's what Pineland's begun thinking. And, I will try to articulate these things better. I put a little preamble out a couple weeks ago, just as a thought, but really a wider audience. And please help me expand it. Please take the ideas and make them your own. Start a debate, start a discussion, hashtag Pineland. And it's just like this trucker convoy. This is something we can do where we say we want a national divorce. 40% of Americans want this. A lot of other countries. And if we do, and then there are people who are outside who want to come in who have something to contribute, hey, maybe we can do something. If you come and you have the right ideas, and you're just coming to get away, you actually want to contribute, I'm all right with that. I've evolved in that position a little bit. And the reason why is you have to judge people by their beliefs, and look, are beliefs correlated with other things? Of course they are. I'm not stupid about that. And will there be different people who have similar beliefs who probably need to be apart because of those differences? Yeah, of course. That's how I feel on Sunday. That's why we go to different services, even though these days I can't go to a church because I feel like so many people are on board with an agenda that's going to be the death of them. And I'm sad of that. I've lost friends over it. We've all lost friends, and it's scary and it's lonely, but we are rebuilding, and that's what's important now, and we are going to be faithful, and that's equally important. And will everyone have to profess? No. I mean, it'll be free will for people who live in a place, because some people will just be stuck as things move around and bung them and try to make it as easy as possible. But ultimately, the